Hi all, I have an absolutely amazing game to show you today. It's between two women's world chess champions, Alexandra Kosteniuk playing white against Yifan Hou playing black. This is in the 2011 FIDE Women's Grand Prix. The reigns of world championship years, Alexandra Kosteniuk was the earlier one, 2008 to 2010, and was succeeded then by Yifan 2010 to 2012. So Alexandra Kosteniuk from Russia, Yifan from China. Let's have a look at this game. d4 from Kosteniuk, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, bishop b4. So the Ragozin variation, a cross between the Queen's Gambit declined and the Nimzo Indian. We have c takes, e takes, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, c5, now e3. This is actually the main move here, and in fact black now plays c4, which is, according to Chess Base Livebook, the main move actually, suppressing that bishop. It looks like quite an ambitious tension release if you haven't seen these positions before, but the pin actually affords this. There's no backfire with bishop f6 and knight d5, for example. That pin is actually very, very useful here, supporting this c4 move. We have now knight d2, and now potentially with the unpinning, it is possible to play to start considering seriously bishop takes f6. So here actually there's an unpinning move here of this knight, g5. If, for example, knight c6 was played, bishop takes, and if black has to have doubled pawns not to lose d5, this is going to be nice for white. So g5, bishop g3, bishop f5, another very interesting move, trying to clamp down on e4. So black's trying to establish a clamp on this e4 square, and the particular trump card as well on the queen side. Potentially, there's a majority of pawns here on the queen side, well, the 3-2 here in particular. So very interesting imbalances from this particular opening. Does black have exploitable weaknesses over here? Difficult to see right now. Let's see, bishop e2, knight c6, h4, so trying to undermine this pawn chain over here. We have rook g8, hg, rook c1. So a very interesting dynamic position. White hasn't castled, white has just activated the rook there, black hasn't castled. This is really quite exciting when both players don't routinely castle. Queen e7. Now, in fact, white did castle. Yeah, maybe a little bit concerned that the advantage that black has here, potentially after queen e7, is the ability potentially to castle queenside, I guess, but there's other options as well. So white did castle here. Is this controversial? Well, only detailed analysis can show. We have now bishop takes c3, rook takes c3. On b takes c3, black could indeed, it seems, castle queenside here. The bishop is looking at that b1 square. It's hard to imagine white getting a strong attack in this kind of scenario. And in fact, I think black is the first one, if we run this simulation, to get a kind of attack on the king side. I think white's king is a little unsafe for that. So rook takes c3. So this has other ideas, actually. It looks as though this pawn chain might be tactically fragile. We have actually b5, which looks absolutely logical. Now a4. And perhaps this is setting a potentially really, really cunning trap to black, to Yifan, who doesn't play what would seem to be a logical move to press forward with the move b4. In fact, a6 is used here. That's a very, very interesting decision. It turns out b4, white might actually have a very important tactical resource here with the king still in the centre. It's said that you shouldn't really indulge in active operations if you haven't really got good king safety or development. You shouldn't do active operations, and maybe that's the case here. Can you see what white could consider playing in this position if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video? So this is just a variation which might have happened. What could white play here? Okay, knight takes c4 is really, really interesting. It's got the idea of knight d6 check, which would hit the bishop. Now, if b takes, taking the rook, yeah, this position here is actually not bad for white. If you look at this is actually rather good. This is a kind of nightmare scenario. The king's really stuck in the centre. Nasty pin, nasty knight on f5. That g5, the whole downside of g5, not weakening f5, nothing to kick f5. It's a bit of a nightmare, that variation. If we just look at this again, this is fascinating stuff. I thought this knight takes c4. If d takes c4 instead, then here, even in this line, bishop e4 to protect the knight, it seems white is able to intensify the pressure on that c file, and the black king is not having an easy life. White's actually technically getting a huge advantage there as well. Very, very interesting variations after d takes c4. If knight d8, just to see, black can start to get pushed back like this, with this d pawn coming down the board. So this is very, very powerful stuff. This variation, where white's doing fantastically well. And if we look at this again after d6, you might think, well, couldn't black play knight takes g3 here? fg opens up the f file against the f5. That is loose again in this variation. After queen d5, that hits a8 and f5. It seems, yeah, this just backfires, which goes to that principle of not doing active operations when you have liabilities. Things do sometimes backfire. So a very, very important, cautious move. a6, it seems. Queen a1. So still on the undermining trail to play a takes, and that's the big threat. Now b4 is played, and it's very, very different to before, actually, with the queen on a1, as you might suspect. The rook actually dropped back. If knight takes c4 here, there's a couple of really sharp moves to address knight d6 check and leave black's pieces hanging. Rook d8, so we got the knight and the rook hanging. And after knight e5, knight takes, and taking here, this, trying to nab that exchange, is actually okay, at least for black. It seems, sometimes, but it's pretty tricky. If we look at this again, so bishop e4 here. We had a look at if knight d8, then again white's getting a huge amount of pressure, actually. Technically, to an engine it might be equal, but actually I think black's got some difficulties here. Black looks visually quite passive. So yes, it is still interesting, to actually consider taking on c4. It wasn't played. Rook c1, rook c1. We have now knight e4, and it seems, because white didn't do that, black does seem to be in a driving seat here with the locking key on e4, and these pawns are also kind of menacing. We have knight takes, bishop takes. White dare not play a move like f3. That's going to weaken e3, of course. But look at this h file. This looks rather scary, this whole h file being potentially used. We have a5, as though maybe this diagonal is going to be good for the queen coming to a4 later. g4. So it looks as though there's a Vulcan grip on the position here against f3 now. We have queen a4. Queen e6. Black's just standing a lot better. There seems to be a lot of possibilities for attack now. For example, crude attacks like this. We have rook fd1, rook c8. Yes. So this is kind of implying that the queen's now freer for an attack without having to nanny the knight. Bishop f4, and now queen f5 is played. So although h6 was extinguished with bishop 8, looking at h6, the queen can now go, now that the knight's been protected, to either h5 or h7. And if that looks really super dangerous. We have king f1. The evacuation begins. This is really rather difficult for white. Perhaps that piece sacrifice was really needed to muddy the waters earlier. This does seem grim. If rook a1, queen h7, for example, and actually even faster than rook h8, what can you see what black could play here? If I give you 5 seconds, this is just a variation. What could black play here? Okay, bishop takes g2 would be crushing, actually, threatening checkmate, And here, this h-file is just killing. If f3, g3 is the most incisive move, sealing the escape exits, and white's going to be mated. So king f1, the evacuation begins. Queen h5, king e1, dropping g2, of course. Bishop d6, bishop f3, bishop takes, g takes, a form pawn on f3. Okay, bishop takes b4. White's pieces just seem really passive here. The king doesn't seem that happy. But concretely, queen h4. So if the king does try and move away, f2 will drop. b3, rook g2. So intensifying on f2. Here, there might have been a stronger move even with rook g1 check. For example, this looks actually as though it's mating after rook g2, threatening queen b2. And other nasties, and queen takes e3, so that's sealing the exit as well for queen e3. And if that's pretty desperate, that'll be checkmating. So yeah, the forced mate in a much quicker mate was missed here. Rook g1, and in that line, if there isn't queen takes c6, yeah, if b takes, queen takes e3 check, and queen takes c1 is mating. So yes, but even so, it's winning now anyway, with this anyway. So rook g1 check, queen takes f2, queen takes e3 check. It's all pretty much running with checks. Check again. Actually, the game ended here. So yeah, rather crushing in the end. So maybe white should have taken that chance to sack a piece on c4. It seems easy to say in retrospect. In this final position, if king c1, f2, and then just queening that f pawn, that's going to be crushing. Queen up. Okay, so let's go to the game end again. So a very, very interesting game in this Ragozin variation. It shows how sharply it can be played. So Hou Yifan's a real exponent, actually, of the Ragozin variation. I've been checking out a few of her games, and if you want a free, short and sweet interactive course on the Ragozin, check out that Kingscrusher TV link, Kingscrusher TV/Ragozin, and you'll find a lot of trainable variations to get more insights into what's going on. But it can be a really dramatic, sharp opening, as this game shows. Okay, hope you got something out of that. Thanks very much.